Catherine stood at the corner of the bustling street, watching the skyline of the city she had always dreamed of living in. It had taken years of sacrifices, countless sleepless nights, and the constant pressure of being the one to keep the family afloat. At 28, Catherine had worked harder than most people her age, grinding day in and day out at a job that demanded everything from her, emotionally, mentally, and physically. But none of that seemed to matter to her family. To them, she was just the one who provided, the one who kept their lives intact while they struggled with their own personal issues. Catherine had always been the dutiful daughter. Her father's business had failed when she was younger, and since then she'd watched as her mother's health deteriorated. For years it was Catherine who picked up the slack, covering bills, sending money for Ryan's school fees, and keeping up appearances. No one seemed to care about the toll it took on her, the way she'd pushed her own dreams aside just to make sure the family was okay. Ryan, her younger brother, had always been the golden child. He was the one who had dreams, big dreams. He wanted to study abroad, to experience life beyond the small town they lived in. Catherine had supported that dream, using her savings to fund his education. Her own aspirations? They came second or not at all. She put her life on hold so Ryan could chase his, and she never once complained, or at least not out loud. But that day, something inside her snapped. Catherine had been saving for years, quietly putting away enough money to buy something for herself, a small apartment, a place she could call her own. She had never thought she'd need something like that. But after years of neglecting her own desires, it felt like the only thing left to give her any sense of self-worth. Her career was thriving, but without a space to call her own, she still felt empty. So, after weeks of second-guessing, Catherine took the plunge. She bought a one-bedroom apartment in the heart of the city, a place that felt like a promise to herself, a symbol of the independence she had longed for. Catherine had never allowed herself to be selfish before. Every penny she had earned had been for the family, until now. She thought that maybe, just maybe, this would be the one thing she could do for herself without feeling guilty. But the guilt, as always, came rushing in. Her family, her mother especially, had been under the impression that Catherine was saving for Ryan's tuition. He wanted to go to a prestigious university abroad, and once again it was Catherine who had been expected to foot the bill. Her mother, Linda, had made it clear for years that Catherine's finances were not hers to keep. "Your brother's future is on the line, Catherine," Linda would say, her voice tinged with a mix of expectation and reproach. "He can't do it without your help." But Catherine had never been allowed to choose for herself. Every time she tried, there was an unspoken rule. Her family's needs came first. Always. That evening, after signing the papers for her new apartment, Catherine felt a strange mixture of exhilaration and anxiety. She had done something for herself, something she had wanted for so long. But now she would have to face the music. She decided to invite her family over to her new place. Maybe, just maybe, they would understand. They would see how hard she had worked for this and be happy for her. She was wrong. So wrong. The dinner started off innocently enough. Linda, her mother, smiled when she saw the apartment, commenting on how much space it had. But Catherine could sense the tension in her mother's words, the way she avoided eye contact. Catherine had known for years that Linda didn't like change, didn't like anything that disrupted the way things were supposed to be. And this was change. As the evening wore on, Catherine tried to relax, to enjoy the moment with her family. But the words from her mother kept circling in her mind. "When will you help Ryan with his tuition?" It was the same question she had heard 1,000 times before. Finally, after dessert, Linda's patience broke. "You've always been so selfish, Catherine." Her mother's voice was cold, cutting through the room like a knife. "You think you can just buy yourself a fancy apartment while your brother struggles? You think you can just walk away from your responsibilities?" Catherine froze, the words striking her like a physical blow. Her hands trembled as she set down her glass of wine, feeling the weight of the accusation. Selfish. She had spent years sacrificing everything for this family, and now she was selfish? "I've helped him for years, Mom," Catherine replied, trying to keep her voice steady, though her chest felt tight. "I've put my own life on hold to make sure Ryan gets what he needs. But I need this. I've worked hard for this apartment. I didn't ask for anything in return." Her mother's eyes narrowed, and her lips twisted into a sneer. "You think you can just buy your way into happiness? You think I don't know what's going on? Ryan needs you. Your family needs you. But you're too busy with your own life to even care. The room fell silent. Catherine could feel every pair of eyes on her, but it was the weight of her mother's gaze that suffocated her the most. The judgment in her eyes was unbearable. Catherine's mind raced. She had worked for everything she had. Every dollar she'd saved. Every late night at the office. It was all for her. And yet here she was being told that none of it mattered. The words her mother had said stung, but it was the feeling of betrayal that hit her hardest. Catherine had always been the one to sacrifice, the one who never asked for anything. And now for the first time in her life she was standing up for herself. But all her mother saw was a failure. You're not thinking about anyone but yourself, Catherine. Linda spat, her voice trembling with anger. You don't care about your family. You're just a selfish, ungrateful daughter. Catherine felt a lump form in her throat. She had never been spoken to like this before. She had never been so openly humiliated, especially not in front of her family. She felt herself start to shake, her hands clenched at her sides, fighting the tears that threatened to spill. Her mother stood up suddenly, taking a step forward, and without warning, her hand came crashing across Catherine's cheek. The slap echoed in the silence of the room, a deafening sound that rang in Catherine's ears. The world around her seemed to slow as she stood frozen, her cheek burning where her mother's hand had struck. She could feel the stares of everyone around her, the weight of their silence. No one said a word. Catherine's heart was pounding in her chest. She had been slapped by her mother, and no one cared. No one said anything. She was alone. Her mother's words, the slap, the cold, unforgiving silence, it all became too much. She had been the one to keep everything together, to hold the family up. But now in this moment it was clear. Nothing she did would ever be enough. Tears burned in Catherine's eyes, but she refused to let them fall. She wasn't going to break in front of them. Not now. Not after everything. Without a word, Catherine turned and walked out of the room, the sounds of the family dinner fading behind her. Catherine slammed the door behind her as she stormed out of her new apartment, the sting of her mother's slap still burning on her cheek. The cool night air hit her face as she walked blindly down the street, her mind racing. She didn't know where she was going, but she knew she couldn't stay there. Not with them. Not in that suffocating silence that felt worse than any insult her mother could have hurled. Her phone buzzed in her pocket, but she ignored it. It was probably her mother or Ryan trying to apologize or worse, blame her. But Catherine couldn't bring herself to even look at their messages. Her heart was still pounding in her chest, each beat like a hammer that made her head spin. She hadn't expected this. She had never imagined that standing up for herself would lead to this. She had tried so hard to make them proud, to be the daughter they wanted her to be. And yet, all it took was one decision, one moment of selfishness, one step toward independence, and everything she had worked for had been torn to shreds. She walked for what felt like hours, her feet carrying her aimlessly, as if trying to escape the weight of the world. She wanted to scream, to cry, to let out all the pent-up frustration that had been building for years. But she couldn't. There was nothing left to scream at. No one would listen. No one ever did. Finally, when her legs gave out from the exhaustion of walking aimlessly through the streets, she found herself sitting on a bench in a quiet park. She hugged her knees to her chest and buried her face in her hands, the tears she had been holding back finally escaping. They didn't come in a flood. They came in silent, bitter sobs, each one like a knot unraveling in her chest. The world around her seemed distant, too far away to reach. She didn't want to go back. She didn't want to face them again. But at the same time she knew she would. She would always go back because that was who she was. The one who gave. The one who sacrificed. The one who kept things together. But not tonight. Tonight she was just Catherine. The daughter who had been slapped in front of her family. The one who had finally tried to stand up for herself and failed. Hours passed, and the ache in her heart didn't fade. She stayed there alone until the city lights blurred into a haze, her thoughts lost in a swirl of confusion and anger. The memory of her mother's words echoed in her mind like a painful mantra. Selfish, ungrateful. You don't care about your family. She hadn't cared about herself for so long. How could her mother say that? After everything she had done. After all the years she had spent giving up her own dreams to hold everything together for them. And this was how they repaid her. By calling her selfish. Catherine finally managed to pull herself together and return home, her eyes swollen from crying, her heart still heavy with the weight of that betrayal. As she opened the door to her apartment, she found herself standing in the middle of the room, feeling the stark contrast between the empty space around her and the chaotic mess in her mind. The apartment that was supposed to be her sanctuary felt like a prison now, its walls closing in around her. She picked up her phone, her fingers trembling as she scrolled through the messages. "Catherine, we need to talk." That was from Ryan. "Why would you do this? I thought you loved us." Another message from her mother. Catherine read the words, but they meant nothing. Nothing at all. Love? She had loved them, given them everything she had, and this was how they showed it? She had been there for every emergency, for every hardship, for every moment when they needed her. But when it came time for her to need something, a little bit of space, a little bit of happiness, they turned on her. They called her selfish. Her phone buzzed again. "Please, Catherine, this is tearing us apart. Call me." It was from her father. She stared at the message, her heart aching. Her father, the man who had always stood by silently, never once defending her when her mother had overstepped. The man who had let her carry the weight of the family while he withdrew into the background. Now he wanted to talk, but she couldn't. She couldn't face them, not after the slap, not after the words that had been said, not after being told that she didn't matter, that she wasn't worth the effort to even try to understand. Catherine's mind was a whirlwind. She couldn't shake the image of her mother's face. Angry, disappointed, filled with rage. She couldn't forget the way her mother's hand had connected with her cheek. The humiliation of being slapped in front of the family. It wasn't just a physical blow. It was a blow to everything Catherine had ever believed about herself, about the family she had sacrificed everything for. How could they do this to her? After all she had given? After all the love she had shown them? She stood in the middle of her apartment, numb and empty. She had thought that buying this apartment would give her freedom, a chance to start over, to live for herself. But all she had done was create another prison, one built out of guilt and expectation. The more she tried to take a step toward her own happiness, the tighter the chains around her grew. She wasn't allowed to have anything for herself, not even this. The weight of it all, her family's disappointment, her mother's anger, the crushing loneliness, was too much to bear. She sank down onto the couch, her body heavy with exhaustion, her mind racing with thoughts she couldn't control. She thought about calling her mother, about apologizing, about making it all right again. But deep down, Catherine knew she couldn't go back. Not after what had happened. Not after the slap. She would never be able to look at her family the same way again. She would never be able to trust them again. Catherine had given everything for them, and in return, they had given her nothing but guilt and pain. And now she was alone. Completely alone. But deep inside she also knew this. She was done sacrificing. She was done being the one who carried the burden. It was time to start living for herself, even if it meant losing them forever. Catherine sat in her apartment, the once welcoming walls now feeling like a cage. The silence weighed heavily on her, and for the first time since she moved in, she couldn't find peace within these walls. The apartment had been meant to give her freedom, a fresh start, a place to call her own. Instead, it felt like a constant reminder of everything she had sacrificed, everything she had lost. Her phone buzzed again, but she didn't need to look at it to know who it was. The messages were always the same. "We need to talk, Catherine." Her mother's name flashed on the screen, but this time she ignored it. How many times had she answered those calls before, only to be met with guilt and expectations? How many times had she put her own desires aside to accommodate them? But not anymore. Not after everything that had happened. The slap. The accusations. The anger. Her mother's voice still echoed in her head. Selfish. Ungrateful. You don't care about your family. The words cut deep, deeper than any physical blow ever could. Catherine had always been the one to make sure everyone else was taken care of, the one to put her dreams on hold, to give every penny she earned, to sacrifice everything for her family. But none of that mattered. In the end, she was just the one who gave, never the one who received. They expected her to keep giving until there was nothing left. She walked to the window and looked out over the city. The streets below were busy with life, but Catherine felt so far removed from it all. Her heart ached with loneliness. She had spent so long trying to please them, trying to be the perfect daughter, the perfect sister. But none of it had ever been enough. Not for her mother. Not for Ryan. And now not even for herself. The ache in her chest was constant, gnawing at her. She was still reeling from the slap, from the public humiliation. She had tried so hard to hold it together, to stay strong. But the truth was she felt broken. She had expected her family to be happy for her, to see how much she had worked for this apartment, how much she had struggled to reach this point. But instead they saw her as a failure, someone who had abandoned them for her own selfish desires. She didn't know how to fix it. She didn't know how to make it right. Every time she thought about calling her mother, the words from that night came rushing back. You don't care about your family. And all Catherine could think was, no, I don't. Not anymore. The shame that had settled deep within her began to unravel. How could she have let herself be so weak for so long? She had spent her entire life living for them, living for everyone else, and now she had nothing to show for it but a deep, suffocating emptiness. Catherine sank down onto the couch, her face buried in her hands. She was exhausted. Exhausted from the emotional toll of trying to please everyone. Exhausted from the constant sense of responsibility that had weighed on her shoulders for years. But most of all, she was exhausted from the fear of losing them. She hadn't realized it until that moment, but what scared her the most was the idea of being completely alone, of not having her family to fall back on, of not being needed anymore. But now she realized it wasn't just about needing them. It was about needing herself. And that scared her even more. She reached for her phone again, her thumb hovering over the message from her mother. This time she opened it. Catherine, please. I'm sorry. We can fix this. Just call me. The apology stung, but it wasn't enough. It didn't undo the slap, the public humiliation, the years of expectation that had suffocated her. She felt a bitter laugh rise in her throat. Fix this? How could they fix what had been broken for so long? She wasn't sure if it was the exhaustion or the anger that had built up over the years, but Catherine made a decision then and there. She wasn't going to let herself be pulled back into that toxic cycle. She wasn't going to beg for their approval anymore. She wasn't going to keep apologizing for living her life the way she saw fit. With a trembling hand, she typed her reply. I can't do this anymore. I've given everything, and it's never enough. I need to live my life for me now. I'm sorry, but I can't keep doing this. Not for you, not for anyone. She stared at the screen for a long moment before hitting send. As soon as she did, her stomach dropped. The finality of it hit her like a ton of bricks. She knew her mother would be hurt, maybe even furious, but Catherine didn't feel any guilt. Not anymore. She had spent years being everything for everyone else, and it had cost her. It had cost her happiness, her peace, her very sense of self. And for what? So they could continue demanding more from her? So they could keep putting their needs above hers? No, she couldn't do it anymore. The phone vibrated in her hand. Another message from her mother. Please, Catherine, don't do this. We need you. But Catherine didn't respond. She couldn't. Her chest tightened again, but this time it wasn't from shame. It was from a sense of clarity, a weight lifting from her shoulders. She was finally making a choice for herself, even if it meant losing them. Catherine spent the next few days in a haze of exhaustion and relief. She didn't answer any of her family's calls. She didn't read their messages. She spent her days alone, wandering the streets of the city, finally feeling the freedom she had craved for so long. It wasn't easy. There were moments when she wanted to reach out, to apologize, to fix things. But then she remembered the slap, the words, the feeling of betrayal. She couldn't go back to that place. One evening, as Catherine sat in a quiet cafe, sipping her coffee and watching the world go by, she realized something. For the first time in her life, she wasn't waiting for permission. She wasn't waiting for approval. She was living for herself. It was a strange feeling, but it was also freeing. The road ahead was uncertain. She didn't know what would happen with her family, or if she would ever be able to repair those relationships. But one thing was clear. She was never going back to the life she had left behind. She was done being the one who always gave, always sacrificed, always put others first. It was time to live her life. For herself. And that was enough. Days turned into weeks and Catherine's world, once confined to the narrow expectations of her family, slowly began to expand. The initial shock of cutting ties with her parents still hung in the air like a fog, but as time went on, she realized that in her silence, in her isolation, there was also peace. At first, there were moments when loneliness gnawed at her. Times when she sat in her apartment, staring out at the city, feeling the weight of the choices she'd made. The apartment, though once a beacon of hope, now sometimes felt like an empty shell. She had always imagined it as a place where she could finally breathe, where she could relax and simply be herself. Yet it wasn't just the apartment that needed rebuilding. It was Catherine. She needed to rebuild herself, to rediscover who she was outside of the role she had played for so long: daughter, caretaker, provider. She started small. She took herself on long walks through the city, letting the rhythm of the streets wash over her. She visited parks, cafes, shops, places she had never explored when she was always rushing to meet someone else's needs. Each step felt like freedom, but it was also terrifying. For the first time in her life, she wasn't tethered to anything. There were no expectations, no obligations, no one waiting for her to come through. One afternoon, as she wandered through a museum, Catherine found herself standing before a painting that stopped her in her tracks. It wasn't the colors or the brushstrokes that captivated her. It was the feeling of weightlessness it evoked. It was a painting of a lone figure, standing at the edge of a cliff, looking out at a vast empty sky. The figure seemed small, insignificant against the grandeur of the landscape. But there was power in the solitude, power in standing alone. For the first time in weeks, Catherine felt a shift within her. A subtle change that whispered, "This is where you belong." The realization hit her like a gentle wave. It was okay to be alone. She had always defined herself by her connections to others, her family, her role as the one who held things together. But she was more than that. She was her own person. And standing in that museum, she understood that her worth wasn't tied to their expectations, to their approval. It was tied to herself, to her own growth, to her own choices. The next few days were a blur of reflection and quiet action. Catherine had been avoiding her phone, but she knew that sooner or later, she'd have to face the inevitable. Her family would come for her, and when they did, she would need to decide what came next. And then one evening the call came. It was from her father. Her heart sank as she saw his name flash on the screen, but she didn't hesitate. She picked up. "Dad." There was a long pause before he spoke. His voice, when it came, was hoarse, tired. "I'm sorry, Catherine. I don't know how to make this right. Your mother. She's devastated. We've been fighting over you, over everything, and I don't know what to do anymore." Catherine's breath caught in her throat. Her father had never been one to speak about his emotions openly. But now, in this moment, she could hear the cracks in his voice, the vulnerability she had always longed to hear. "I can't keep doing this, Dad," she said, her voice steady. "I can't keep being the one who holds everything together, who keeps sacrificing my life for everyone else. You don't understand what it feels like to be the one everyone leans on, and then to realize no one is there for you when you need them." "I know, baby," he whispered. "I know. But we need you. Your mother, she's not herself without you. She's angry, she's hurt, and I don't know how to fix it. I don't know what to say to her. I'm just trying to hold this family together." The words felt like a knife, but Catherine wasn't angry. Not anymore. She had been angry, furious even when they had betrayed her, when they had slapped her in front of everyone. But now she simply felt exhausted. She had given them everything, and now it was her turn to live for herself. "I can't fix this, Dad. I can't make everything right. I've spent my whole life trying to do that, and I've lost myself in the process. I need to figure out who I am before I can help anyone else." There was a long silence, but Catherine didn't break it. She had said what needed to be said. And for the first time in her life, she didn't feel the need to apologize for it. "I understand, Catherine," her father said softly. "I know you do. But if you ever decide to come back, we'll be here. I'll be here." Catherine held her breath for a moment, her chest tight, before she finally spoke. "I'm not coming back, Dad. Not like I was before. I'm going to live for myself now. I can't keep living for you or Mom or Ryan. I need to find out who I really am, and I need to do it alone. Okay, he whispered. I understand. Just don't forget us, okay? I won't, Catherine said, her voice strong but gentle. But I can't be what you want me to be anymore. The call ended, and Catherine stood in the quiet of her apartment, staring out the window at the city below. For the first time in weeks, she felt at peace. The next few days were filled with small steps toward reclaiming her life. Catherine threw herself into her work, finally taking on projects that she had long neglected. Things that excited her, things that challenged her. She explored the city on weekends, not just as a tourist, but as someone who was beginning to find her own place in the world. She joined a local book club, met new friends, and even took a painting class just for the fun of it. The freedom to do whatever she wanted, without the burden of others' expectations, was both terrifying and exhilarating. But as the weeks passed, Catherine realized something. She wasn't alone. Not really. She had herself, and that was enough. The road ahead wasn't easy, and there would be moments when the weight of her family's absence would hurt, but she had learned the most important lesson of all. Her happiness, her peace, her life was her own to define. She would never be the daughter they wanted her to be. But for the first time, Catherine was okay with that. She was finally living her truth. And that was enough.